Arms warriors are master weaponsmiths, overpowering their enemies in the battlefield with both mobility and weapon prowess. This guide for the War Within Season 1 is going to be absolutely beginner-friendly, telling you everything you need to know to succeed in Season 1. However, I will be still going into enough depth that everyone who is a veteran and wants to know their rotation, etc., and all the details will also get everything they need as well. Let's jump straight into it then with the stats and stat priority we are going to be using. So, of course, our main priority is going to be strength, getting a higher and higher eye level or item level, giving us, of course, more strength. Strength equals more damage. The secondary stats, the priority is going to be here. However, unless you're comparing two items of the same eye level, I really wouldn't worry too much. Always getting a higher eye level of gear is generally always just going to be an improvement. We have versatility. This increases damage done and any healing that we're doing, while also simultaneously reducing damage taken. And it's just an all-around, pretty basic, great stat. Haste increases how quickly we are attacking and our resources. Mastery is actually different for every spec. As an arms warrior, it's deep wounds. Mortal Strike, Colossus Smash, and Blade Storm, a few of our core abilities that I'm going to be showing you in the rotation, inflict deep wounds, dealing a big amount of bleed damage over 12 seconds and increasing the damage our enemies take from us by a higher and higher amount for the more mastery. Critical Strike, the higher the percentage, stats on gear, gives you a chance to do more damage and healing. While we're here, let's just look at our set pieces as well for the veterans watching. 2 set, Mortal Strike and Cleave, increase the damage of our next Overpower. And the 4 set for Season 1 in the War Within, when Overpower has its cooldown reset by Tactician, your next Mortal Strike or Cleave has its damage increased by 10% and Critical Strike chance increased by 10%, and that can stack twice. If you're not sure what those are, don't worry. I'll be fully explaining it in the rotation shortly. So now we're going to look through some of the utilities and defensives that you have available to you as a warrior. And yes, that does mean these are going to be available in any spec you want. So do check out the playlist on my channel because I have done all warrior specs for you. Now, there are, of course, always going to be more utilities that you can use. Each class has quite a lot of them, but these ones are the most important ones, or the kind of ones you're going to use the most. And I do always recommend that once you're familiar with the game or with your class or spec, etc., that you go into the spellbook and just have a look through at what else you do have available. So the ones I want to talk through with you today are first Pummel. Pummels the target, interrupting spell casting and preventing any spell in that skill from being cast. So if your enemy is casting a spell, you can see here that Boomkin was casting Full Moon, and now they're casting Sunfire. Well, basically, that's going to interrupt that spell cast. It's otherwise known as a kick. Kick or interrupt is what it's known as in World of Warcraft. And that is a really, really useful ability, especially in, PvP, especially in Mythic Plus. You're going to be doing a lot of interrupting wherever possible, and it is only on a 15-second cooldown. Then we have Piercing Howl, snares all enemies within 12 yards, reducing their movement speed by 70% for 8 seconds. A massive slow that we can put on nearby enemies. Then we have Hamstring here. It's going to cost you 10 rage, which is our main warrior resource, maims the enemy for X amount of damage, reducing their movement speed by 50% for 15 seconds. Again, another slow that we can use on our enemy. Over on the right, then, we've got some things that are more affecting us and our allies in a positive way. The first up being Bitter Immunity on a 3-minute cooldown. Restores 20% of your health instantly and removes any diseases, poisons, or curses that are affecting you. So if someone poisons you, you can press this button, restore some health, and just wipe out that poison immediately. A really great defensive cooldown we have there as a warrior. Rallying Cry. Let loose a Rallying Cry, granting all party or raid members 10% temporary and maximum health for 10 seconds, boosting up our raid party and ourselves with more health. If you know the boss or whoever you're fighting is going to do a big, massive old damage cooldown. This could really help bump up your health temporarily and increase your kind of resistance against that boss. And then we have Battle Shouts. This has been around for a long time, but it's still, of course, here in the War Within. Increases the attack power of you, your party, and raid members by 5% for a whole entire hour. You should always be using this at all times. You can see it on the buff bar up here. It's up for an entire hour, simply increasing our attack power by 5%. You know, warriors and any other kind of classes that go off attack power are going to benefit massively from this buff that we as a warrior can bring to the table. And those are the main cooldowns and sort of utilities and defensives that we can use as a warrior. Again, if you are a complete beginner, do look through the spellbook here once you're more comfortable with the spec and rotation and see what else we have available. All of these will be coming from the warrior tree. So if you're not actually sure, on the right here, we have the fury tree. And then on the left, we have the warrior tree. Now, ignore this one on the right. This isn't actually set up for any guides or anything. This is just a template to show you the warrior tree. But the warrior tree on the left will not change in any spec. So if you are in arms, fury, or protection, this warrior tree over here will always be the same. You can, of course, change your talents depending on which spec you are in, though. But you do have access to all of these, no matter the specialization you are currently in. Now let's look at the rotation and how it is actually going to come together as an arms warrior for PvP. So, before you go into battle, make sure you use your battle shout. It's going to increase your attack power of all party and raid members for an entire hour. And then to actually go into combat, you would generally use your charge, charging in and rooting them for a second and generating 20 rage. Rage being our main resource that we're generating and using for our abilities. Then what we're going to do is, these are kind of our general and burst abilities. And this second row is more our utilities and kind of class defensives, etc. that we're also going to be using. So the first thing we want to use is our hamstring to slow them down for 50% for 15 seconds. Try and keep this up on your kill target at all times to slow them down. Also keep up rend on them. Wounds the target, causing damage and instantly an additional amount of bleed damage over 20 seconds. One thing to note is that if you use your Thunderclap, this is also going to apply rend to those targets. So you can see when I used Thunderclap, both targets now have rend on them. So if you're up against a few, you can use that to get loads out in a short space. We then have Sweeping Strikes, where for 15 seconds, your single target damaging abilities hit an additional target. If there's only one person you're up against, obviously you don't need to use this, but if there is someone else nearby, this is going to be fantastic. Then we have our Burst, Avatar, and Warbreaker. Avatar transforms you into a Colossus, dealing 20% increased damage and removing all roots and snares and generating some rage. And Warbreaker smashes the ground and shatters armor of all enemies, dealing damage and increasing damage you deal to them by 30% for 10 seconds, which is obviously a lot. Then we're going to use Mortal Strike on cooldown, a vicious strike dealing damage and reducing the effectiveness of any healing on the target. I would especially use this after you use these. So you basically would slow them, put on your bleed, and then go ham, go crazy, reduce the healing that they take, etc. And then use something like Overpower to then enhance your next Mortal Strike. So overpowers the enemy, dealing physical damage, cannot be blocked, dodged, or parried, and increases the damage of your next Mortal Strike by 30%. And that can actually stack twice, meaning that Mortal Strike becomes massively overpowered. If we ever get a sudden death proc, or when the enemy drops below health, we can use our Execute. Sudden Death is this talent here. Your attacks have a chance to make your next execute cost no rage and be usable on any target and deal damage as if you spent 40 rage. Basically, Execute does more damage for the more rage you spend on it. Attempts to finish off a foe, causing damage based on rage spent. Only usable on enemies with less than 35% health, but when you get a proc on it, you can use it whenever the hell you like, so do use it at that point. If your foe survives, 10% of the rage is also refunded back to you. And then lastly, we have Thunderclap, which I've already mentioned. There is a few other things we can use. Stormbolt, hurling weapon at an enemy, causing damage and stunning them. It's on a cooldown as well. And also Shockwave, sending a wave of force in a frontal cone, damaging and stunning enemies within 10 yards. And there's your Execute proc there, so we can use that regardless of their health. Looking at the other utilities and things we have, we've got Berserker Rage. Go Berserk, removing and granting immunity to fear, sap, and incapacitate attacks for 6 seconds, so we can get out of those. defensive stance, a defensive combat stance that reduces all damage you take and damage you deal. Now, Berserker Battle Stance, even not Berserker, Battle Stance is gonna be your offensive stance, whereas defensive stance is your defensive one. You can swap between them as you need, depending on what is happening. We've got Heroic Leap on a 30-second cooldown, where I can sort of leap over here. This can be offensive and defensive. It can get you out of wherever you are, or it can get you in to where you need to be. Leap through the air, slamming down, dealing damage to your target, and all enemies within 8 yards. Then we've got Impending Victory on a 25-second cooldown. Instantly attack the target, causing damage and healing you for 30% of your max health. This is our only actual heal as a warrior, so this one is really useful. It's on a 25-second cooldown, which isn't too long, but do use it carefully. As I said, it's your only actual proper heal that we can really use. We've got Intimidating Shout on a 1.5-minute cooldown, causing them to cower in fear and up to 5 additional enemies within 8 yards to flee. Targets are disoriented. We've got Pummel, which is our interrupt. Rallying Cry, increasing health of our allies nearby. Shield Block, blocking all melee attacks, which is amazing, especially if they go into their burst phase and they're melee. You can then just block them all for a few seconds, and that can really kind of ruin their burst period. Shockwave and Stormbolt we have mentioned, and then Die by the Sword on a 1.4-minute cooldown, increase your parry chance and reduces all damage you take by a whopping 30%. Speaking of reducing damage, we also have Ignore Pain, which is another rage spender. Fight through the pain, ignoring 50% of damage taken, up to 1.1 million total prevented. And that's actually only on an 11-second cooldown. So this is kind of more your defensive and utilities here, and then this is kind of the main abilities that you are going to be using against your enemies here. We're using Warbreaker and Avatar, which you can also line up, so you could use your Overpower to increase your Mortal Strike, and then be like, right, I've got my Rend up, they're slowed, and then go into your burst abilities here, and then, you know, just go ham on them. For the PvP talents, I like to go with Sharpen Blade. When activated, your next Mortal Strike will deal even more damage and reduce healing taken by 50% for 4 seconds. Especially if you're going into your burst phase, it's going to be amazing at reducing, you know, their effectiveness of their healer if they have one, as well, which can be absolutely fantastic. And then we have Safeguard. It is a passive. Intervene now has 2 charges and reduces an ally's damage taken by 20% for 5 seconds. And Intervene's cooldown is increased by 10 seconds, however. But I don't think I actually went through Intervene, actually. I do apologise. Run at high speed toward an ally, intercepting all melee and range attacks against them for 6 seconds while they remain within 10 yards. So if they are trying to burst down your ally and they get to a fairly low health, you can kind of go in, intercept that, and again, ruin that for the enemy. Another one I absolutely love is Disarm. Disarm the enemy's weapons and shield for 5 seconds. Disarmed creatures deal significantly reduced damage. Again, weapon-based classes like a Subtlety Rogue or a Frost DK, this can be fantastic against them, basically rendering them almost useless, especially if they're trying to nuke you down. If you're up against enemies where that isn't going to work as well, Duel could be another option. You challenge the target to a duel. While challenged, all target you and the target deal to all targets other than each other is reduced. So if they're trying to fixate on somebody else, you can massively reduce the damage they're going to do. It can really put them off guard, and they're like, oh no, what's happening? And it can just absolutely ruin the rotation they're trying to carry out. So in this Arms Warrior build, we are going with Colossus. And this is quite interesting. I actually quite like Colossus talents. So we're starting off with Demolish, okay? It's a channeled spell. Unleash a series of precise and powerful strikes against your target, dealing damage to it, and damage to enemies within 8 yards, deals reduced damage beyond 8 targets. While channeling Demolish, you take 10% less damage and are immune to stuns, knockbacks, and forced movement effects. And you can still block, parry, dodge, and use certain defensive abilities while channeling Demolish. Oh my god, that's a really long one. So basically, it's just like a channeled boom, 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 boom attack. Going down the left side first, critical strike damage of your abilities is increased and the amount of damage blocked by your crits is increased. Then we have what I'd like to say is a single target versus AoE situation on this first choice node. One against many. Kind of says it in the name, right? Shockwave, Cleave, and Whirlwind deal 5% more damage per target affected. So actually, the more targets you're up against, the more damage we're doing. Versus the single target option, or better for single target, Colossal Might increases the damage of your Rend and Deep Wounds by 2% per stack. Then we have Mortal Strike and Cleave, both increase damage there. Colossal Might in the middle. Colossal Might increases damage dealt by your next Demolish. Remember, this is your Demolish, this new ability, by 10%, and that can stack. The Colossal Might increases the damage of your Demolish, and that can stack. Mortal Strike and Execute grant a stack of Colossal Might, this here, and Execute grants a stack. Mortal Strike and Execute grant a stack of Colossal Might, and Cleave also grants a stack when it strikes 3 or more targets. Bit convoluted there, but we're basically just passively getting stacks of Demolish and Colossal Might. Tide of Battle, it's also going to increase the damage of your Overpower, which is nice. Mortal Strike, critical strikes grant an additional stack of Colossal Might. An option again here, Earthquaker or Bone Shaker. I like Earthquaker, where Shockwave also knocks down enemies or knocks them into the air, and its actual cooldown is decreased as well by 5 seconds, so you can use it more often. Another interesting choice node, No Stranger to Pain, where the total damage prevented by Ignore Pain is increased, or Veteran Vitality. When your health is brought below 35% health, you get a second wind, healing you for your max health over 2 seconds, and it can happen once a minute. I like Veteran Vitality because it's happening passively, and if you're like, oh no, I'm at really low health, it's going to heal you. Whereas No Stranger to Pain is more going to be used when a big amount of damage is incoming and you're going to use your Ignore Pain, whereas Veteran Vitality really helps you in those unknown situations. If you take your eye off the ball, you step in something accidentally, if somebody hits you and you go low and you weren't expecting to, it's kind of a get-out-of-jail-free card. Do you know what I mean? And that's why I really like Veteran Vitality. If you know the fight or you know what's happening, you know what you're up against, who you're up against, and you can kind of, work out what's happening there, or there's a big cooldown incoming about, then No Stranger to Pain may be better. So it's kind of up to you, really, in the nuance and niche situations where you're going to be choosing these. Mountain of Muscle and Scars, then you deal 4% more damage and take less damage, and your size is increased, which is kind of cool. It is a Colossus hero talent tree after all. And then Colossal Might now stacks up to 10 times. If you would gain a stack and are at max stacks, the cooldown of Demolish is reduced. Enemies affected by Demolish take up to 10% more damage from you and deal 5% less damage to you based on the number of stacks of Colossal Might that are consumed by Demolish. I just want to go over these two again quickly because this is so un-beginner friendly. It's insane. Unleash a series of precise, powerful attacks against your target, dealing damage, right? So it's a channeled attack and damage to enemies within 8 yards. And it's going to deal reduced damage beyond 8 targets. While you are channeling it, you take 10% less damage and can't be stunned, etc. And then we have Colossal Might, which increases damage dealt by your next Demolish. And Mortal Strike and Execute grant a stack of Colossal Might, and Cleave grants a stack of Colossal Might when it strikes more targets. That is all worked into the rotation I've already shown you. I just wanted to go through the hero talents to kind of explain what we've got and why we're taking them. So don't worry if that does sound confusing. It's already worked into the rotation that we have gone through in this guide. Looking at the consumables and enchants, etc., that we're going to be using in the War Within. First up is Nerubian Gem Weavers. These are the new ways to add sockets to your gear from the weekly Great Vault. So you can put one on your head, wrist, and waist. On the neck, ring and ring 2, we can use a magnificent jeweler setting to add 2 sockets to each slot for jewelry. Then on the enchants, Chant of Winged Grace, giving full damage reduction and also avoidance on the cloak. Chest is Crystalline Radiance, that gives primary stat. Avoidance on the wrist. Defender's Armor Kit on the legs. Scout's March on the boots, which give, movement speed. And then Mastery enchants on your rings. Then it's going to be Authority of the Depths on your weapons, which basically is, it's pretty cool actually. It means that we're going to apply darkness to our weapon, and periodically that is going to do some damage, and it can also stack up to 3 times. For the actual consumables, Flask of Alchemical Chaos is the flask we're going to use. This is going to increase a secondary stat randomly, and it's kind of basically going to cycle. It will increase your secondary stat by 7,600 at the cost of 600 to the other 2. And again, that's going to cycle round. And then we have primary stat feasts, a tempered potion, which will actually give you your other secondary stats that your flask is not currently giving. Healing potion is going to be an Algari healing potion. And then Iron Claw whetstones here. You can see when and why we would be using these depending on weapon type. Crystallized augment rune will give strength on your augment rune. And then the sockets, the culminating blasphemite, basically it's going to give you primary stat, and then it's going to give you critical strike effect, 0.15% for each different colored gem you have. So we can use an emerald, sapphire, ruby, and onyx to get the full effect on there. Thank you so much for watching this guide. I hope it was really useful for you in The War Within Season 1, whether it was for Mythic Plus or raiding. If you do have any questions, I'll be happy to help. My Patreon is in the description below, and that is where you can find my LVUI profiles, which I'll show you in a second. And also, I'm putting together a huge macro list for every single spec that's going to be really useful for you in The War Within as well. I am doing all classes and specs for The War Within, so if you are new to the channel, then please do click this playlist here to check out what else I have, which is all of them. There will also be PvP guides on this channel as well for War Within Season 1, so make sure to look out for that. This here is the UI that I was referring to. As you can see, we've got target frames, etc., left and right, and raid frames go in the middle here, and then weak auras in the middle with an action bar down here. Chat is behind where my camera is. Minimap and details, etc., are here on the right. All of the plater profiles, the voodoo, the LVUI, etc., details profile has all been made by me. And again, you can get this on my Patreon should you like it.